April 17th, 2011, Charlotte, North Carolina. A house in a quiet suburban neighborhood becomes the scene of a shocking discovery. The body of 38-year-old Marissa Clark is found by her husband, Thomas Clark, in the bathroom. Her throat is slit, and the house shows signs of a struggle. What was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday morning quickly escalates into a complex investigation that unravels a web of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Marissa Clark, a devoted housewife, had been married to Thomas Clark, a successful real estate agent, for 15 years. They lived in a modest but well-kept suburban home with their two children, 14-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake. From the outside, the Clarks appeared to be the perfect family. However, behind closed doors, Marissa was harboring a secret that would eventually lead to her tragic demise. Between January 2010 and June 2010, Marissa Clark's life began to change in ways that even she did not fully understand. It all started innocently enough. A small leak had appeared in the kitchen faucet, just a drip that had annoyed Marissa every time she used the sink. Thomas, her husband, was always busy with his work in real estate and didn't have time to fix it himself. So Marissa decided to call a plumber. On January 5th, 2010, Ryan Hayes arrived at the Clark home around 10 a.m. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and rugged, with the kind of hands that had seen years of hard work. Marissa had never met him before, but something about him struck her immediately. He was friendly, but not overly so, and he worked quietly, efficiently fixing the leak in a matter of minutes. As he worked, they exchanged small talk. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual conversation about the weather, the neighborhood, and Ryan's line of work. Marissa found herself drawn to his calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the hectic pace of her life at home. Ryan finished the job and left, but Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She thought about him more than she should have in the days that followed, wondering what it was about him that had left such an impression. Life went on as usual, but Marissa noticed that she began to look forward to any excuse to have Ryan return. When the bathroom sink began to clog in early February, Marissa didn't hesitate to call him again. On February 12th, 2010, Ryan arrived at the Clark home at 9:30 a.m. this time, and Marissa felt that same inexplicable pull toward him. As he worked, their conversation went deeper than before. They talked about their lives, their dreams, and the things that made them who they were. Marissa found herself laughing more than she had in years, and she noticed Ryan's eyes lingering on her longer than they had during his first visit. After Ryan left that day, Marissa felt a flutter of excitement that she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help it. Her marriage to Thomas had grown routine, predictable. He was a good man, a good father, but their relationship lacked the passion it once had. She wondered if it was her fault, if she had become too comfortable, too complacent. Ryan represented something new, something thrilling, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to resist it. Over the next few weeks, Marissa's thoughts became consumed with Ryan. She began to make excuses to see him again, finding small issues around the house that needed fixing, none of which truly required a professional. On March 2nd, 2010, Marissa called Ryan to fix a supposed issue with the water pressure in the shower. When he arrived at 10:15 a.m., the tension between them was palpable. They both knew it, but neither of them said anything. Instead, they danced around it, talking about everything and nothing, both aware of the unspoken feelings that were growing stronger with each passing day. By the end of March, Marissa couldn't deny her feelings any longer. On March 25th, 2010, she invited Ryan over under the pretense of looking at a leak under the kitchen sink. When he arrived at 9 a.m., she was waiting for him, her heart pounding in her chest. They talked for a while, But this time the conversation was different. There was an electricity in the air, a connection that neither of them could ignore. Without thinking, Marissa leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss that felt like it had been a long time coming. And in that moment, Marissa knew there was no turning back. From that day forward, Marissa and Ryan's relationship quickly escalated. They began meeting in secret, always careful to keep their affair hidden. Ryan would visit the Clark home during the day, while Thomas was at work and the children were at school. Marissa would wait for him, her heart racing with anticipation, and they would spend hours together, their relationship growing deeper with each meeting. They also began to meet at motels around the city, places where they knew they wouldn't be recognized. These meetings became a regular occurrence, always planned out with meticulous care to avoid suspicion. Marissa found herself making up excuses to leave the house, telling Thomas she had errands to run or was meeting friends for lunch. She became an expert at lying, at covering her tracks, all the while knowing that what she was doing could destroy her family. As the months passed, Marissa became more and more entangled in her affair with Ryan. She knew it was dangerous, that it couldn't last forever, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. Ryan made her feel alive, in a way that she hadn't felt in years, and she wasn't ready to give that up. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, but until then, she was determined to live in the moment, to hold on to the excitement that Ryan brought into her life. The affair remained undetected for several months, but the strain of living a double life began to take its toll on Marissa. She became distant from Thomas, spending more time away from home, and when she was home, she was often distracted, lost in her thoughts about Ryan. Thomas noticed the changes in her behavior, but he didn't press her for answers, assuming that she was just going through a phase. By October 2010, the once thrilling affair between Marissa Clark and Ryan Hayes began to take a dark turn. It started subtly. An anonymous note slipped into Marissa's mailbox. The note was brief, but chilling. "End it now, or you will pay." Marissa stared at the note in disbelief, her heart pounding. She quickly crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash, convincing herself that it was a prank, some cruel joke by a neighborhood kid. Or perhaps someone who had seen her with Ryan and wanted to scare her. She couldn't allow herself to think otherwise, couldn't let the fear take root. But as the days turned into weeks, the notes continued to arrive, each one more threatening than the last. By the end of October, Marissa had received 5 more notes. The language became increasingly aggressive. "You think you're safe, but we're watching. Stop now, or your family will pay. I know everything." These notes were no longer something she could brush off. They were terrifying, and Marissa began to feel a constant sense of dread. Every creak in the house, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She started looking over her shoulder, her mind racing with fear and paranoia. By November 2010, Marissa was living in a state of constant anxiety. She became jumpy, nervous, unable to sleep through the night. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who could possibly know about her affair and why they were tormenting her. She thought about telling Ryan, but she didn't want to drag him into her fears. She didn't want him to think she was weak, that she couldn't handle the pressure. So she kept the notes to herself, hiding them in a shoebox in the back of her closet, hoping that if she ignored them, the threats would eventually stop. But they didn't stop. By December 2010, the notes had become a daily occurrence. Some were left in her mailbox, others slipped under her front door, and a few even placed on her car windshield while she was out running errands. Each time she found a new note, she would feel a surge of panic, her hands shaking as she read the threatening words. The fear was overwhelming, but Marissa felt trapped, unable to confide in anyone. She was too scared to tell Thomas, knowing that revealing the notes would mean revealing her affair. And she was too afraid to go to the police, worried that doing so would bring even more attention to her secret. As January 2011 arrived, Marissa's life was unraveling. The stress of the threats, combined with the guilt of her affair, began to take a toll on her health. She lost weight, her face grew pale, and she developed dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. She became more withdrawn from her family, often locking herself in the bathroom to cry, her body shaking with silent sobs. Thomas noticed the change in her, but she always brushed off his concerns, telling him she was just tired or stressed from managing the household. But Thomas wasn't convinced. By February 2011, Thomas Clark had grown increasingly suspicious of his wife's behavior. He had noticed unexplained charges on their credit card statements, hotel rooms, meals at restaurants, all during times when Marissa had told him she was out with friends. Her once calm and steady demeanor had become erratic, and Thomas could no longer ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. On February 8, 2011, he made a decision that would change everything. He hired a private investigator. The investigator worked quickly, and within 2 weeks, he had gathered all the evidence Thomas needed to confirm his worst fears. The investigator provided him with photos of Marissa and Ryan together, detailed reports of their meetings at motels, and even records of phone calls and text messages between the two. On February 26, 2011, Thomas sat in his car, parked a few blocks away from his home, and flipped through the photographs. Each image was like a knife to his heart. There was Marissa, the woman he had loved for 15 years, smiling, laughing, kissing another man. Thomas felt a rage building inside him, a fury so intense that he thought he might explode. On March 12, 2011, Thomas couldn't hold back any longer. He waited until the children were out of the house and then confronted Marissa. It was around 10 a.m. when Thomas laid the evidence in front of her. Photos, receipts, everything. Marissa's face went white as she realized what she was looking at. At first she tried to deny it, stammering, trying to come up with lies to explain away the damning evidence. But the look in Thomas's eyes told her that it was no use. The truth was out. Marissa broke down, sobbing, pleading with Thomas to forgive her, promising that she would end the affair immediately, that she would do anything to save their marriage. But Thomas was beyond devastated. His love for Marissa had turned into something cold and dark, a mixture of betrayal, anger, and deep hurt. He demanded that she cut all ties with Ryan, that she never see him again, and that she focus on repairing the damage she had done to their family. 3 days later, on March the 15th, 2011, Marissa picked up the phone to call Ryan. It was 9:45 a.m. when she dialed his number, her hands trembling. Ryan answered after the first ring, his voice warm and familiar. But Marissa couldn't bring herself to respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper as she told him it was over. Ryan was stunned. He tried to reason with her, to convince her that they could still be together, that she should leave Thomas and start a new life with him. But Marissa was resolute. She told Ryan that she had to stay for the sake of her children, that she couldn't tear her family apart. Ryan's tone shifted from heartbreak to anger. He began to raise his voice, pleading with Marissa to reconsider, but she couldn't listen to it anymore. The guilt, the fear, the weight of everything she had done was crushing her. She hung up the phone abruptly, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had lost something she could never get back. On March 20th, 2011, Ryan Hayes began to unravel, his obsession with Marissa Clark reaching a dangerous level. Unable to accept that she had ended their affair, Ryan started to follow her, watching her every move. It began innocently enough. He would drive by her house at odd hours, park a block away, and watch as she went about her daily routine. But as the days went on, his behavior became more disturbing. He started to show up at places where he knew she would be. The grocery store, her children's school, even outside her home. Marissa, who was already on edge from the anonymous threats she had been receiving, quickly noticed that something was wrong. The first time she saw him outside her children's school, her heart nearly stopped. It was a chilly afternoon, around 3 p.m. Emma and Jake had just finished their classes for the day, and Marissa was waiting in the car for them to come out. She spotted Ryan across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his eyes fixed on her car. She felt a wave of panic wash over her, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She wanted to confront him, to ask him what he was doing there, but fear held her back. Instead, she sat frozen, her mind racing. What did he want? Why was he doing this? When Emma and Jake finally got into the car, Marissa quickly drove away, her heart pounding. But the encounter left her shaken, and she knew she had to do something. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, she confided in her closest friend, Karen Mitchell. It was around 8 p.m. when she called Karen, her voice trembling as she explained what had been happening. Karen listened intently, her concern growing with every word Marissa spoke. "You need to tell Thomas," Karen urged. "He needs to know what's going on." But Marissa was too scared. She feared the consequences of revealing her affair, of bringing Ryan's obsessive behavior to light. She told Karen that she couldn't tell Thomas. Not yet. She needed to handle it on her own. But Karen wasn't convinced. She could hear the fear in Marissa's voice, the desperation, and it worried her deeply. As April approached, Ryan's behavior grew even more erratic. On April 15th, 2011, Marissa received another anonymous note. This time, the message was more threatening than ever before. "You think it's over? Think again. I'll see you soon." Marissa's blood ran cold as she read the words. She knew, deep down, that the note was from Ryan. The thought of him lurking around her home, leaving these notes, terrified her. She started looking over her shoulder constantly, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She couldn't go anywhere without feeling like she was being watched. The fear consumed her, and she became paranoid, avoiding being alone whenever possible. The day before the murder, on April 16th, 2011, Marissa made one last attempt to reason with Ryan. She agreed to meet him at a secluded park, hoping to finally put an end to his relentless pursuit. It was around 2 p.m. when they met, the park eerily quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Marissa's heart raced as she saw Ryan approaching, his expression dark and determined. She pleaded with him to let her go, to leave her and her family alone. She told him that their affair was a mistake, that she needed to focus on her children and her marriage. But Ryan refused to listen. His obsession had taken over, and he couldn't accept the idea of losing her. His voice grew louder, more insistent, as he demanded that she leave Thomas and be with him. The conversation quickly turned violent when Ryan grabbed Marissa by the arm, his grip tight and painful. He told her that she couldn't just walk away, that he wouldn't allow it. Marissa, terrified, managed to break free from his grasp and ran to her car. She drove away as fast as she could, her hands shaking, her mind racing with fear. When she got home, it was around 4 p.m., and she was still shaken from the encounter. She knew she had to tell Thomas, that she couldn't keep this secret any longer. But before she could finish telling him what had happened, they heard the children coming home, and the conversation was cut short. They agreed to discuss it further in the morning, but by then it would be too late. The next day, on April 17th, 2011, the events that would lead to Marissa's tragic death unfolded with chilling precision. It was around 6:45 a.m. when Thomas left the house for an early morning meeting. Marissa stayed behind to prepare breakfast for the children. The morning was calm, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the house. Marissa let the dog out through the back door, leaving it unlocked in her haste to get breakfast ready. She didn't know that this simple act would seal her fate. At 7:15 a.m., Ryan Hayes, who had been watching the house since the early hours of the morning, made his move. He sneaked into the house through the unlocked back door, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and desperation. He found Marissa in the kitchen, her back turned as she prepared breakfast. The sight of her, so close, yet so far from his grasp, sent him into a rage. He grabbed her by the arm, demanding that she leave with him. But Marissa resisted, trying to pull away. The struggle quickly escalated, and in a fit of uncontrollable rage, Ryan grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Without hesitation, he slashed Marissa's throat, the blade cutting deep. Marissa collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around her as she took her final breath. Ryan stood over her, his mind racing, his hands trembling with the realization of what he had done. Panic set in as he tried to clean up the scene, but the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs stopped him cold. Emma was awake. Ryan fled the house, leaving behind the horror he had created. At 7:45 a.m., Emma found her mother's body. The sight was too much for the 14-year-old to comprehend. She screamed, her voice echoing through the house as she called 911. The police arrived within minutes, the house quickly becoming a crime scene. The investigation began immediately. The police secured the crime scene, meticulously collecting evidence. They found signs of a struggle in the kitchen. Overturned chairs, broken dishes, and blood everywhere. The knife used in the murder was recovered, bearing Ryan's fingerprints and traces of his DNA. Marissa's phone was also found, containing a series of texts and calls from Ryan in the days leading up to her death. It was clear that Ryan was responsible. On April 18, 2011, detectives interviewed Thomas and the children. Thomas, still in shock, provided the police with everything they needed to know about Marissa's affair and Ryan's recent behavior. He handed over the threatening notes, confirming that Marissa had been living in fear for weeks. The police wasted no time issuing a warrant for Ryan Hayes' arrest. 2 days later, on April 20th, 2011, Ryan was found hiding out at a motel just outside the city. He had been on the run since the murder, but he didn't resist when the police arrived. They arrested him without incident and brought him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Ryan initially denied any involvement in Marissa's death, but the evidence was too strong. Faced with the overwhelming proof against him, Ryan eventually confessed, claiming that he had acted out of passion, that he never intended to kill her. By April 25th, 2011, Ryan Hayes was formally charged with first-degree murder. The case against him was ironclad. His confession, the DNA evidence, the threatening notes, all of it pointed to a premeditated crime, fueled by obsession. The trial began on June 10th, 2011. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see justice served. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting Ryan's obsessive behavior and the cold, calculated nature of the murder. Thomas testified, his voice steady as he recounted the events leading up to Marissa's death. Karen Mitchell also took the stand, providing crucial details about Marissa's fear and Ryan's escalating threats. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict. On July 2nd, 2011, Ryan Hayes was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again be free to harm another person. As the trial came to an end, the Clark family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Marissa's death had torn them apart, leaving wounds that would take years to heal. But justice had been served, and Ryan Hayes would pay for his crime for the rest of his life. As the tragic death of Marissa Clark unraveled, one can only speculate about the true nature of obsession and where it can lead. Was it truly Ryan's infatuation that spiraled into violence, or did the seeds of his obsession lie deeper? Some whisper that Ryan's actions were more calculated than they appeared, raising the question, could this have been his first violent outburst, or just the first one we know about? And then, there's the question lingering in everyone's mind. Could Marissa have made different choices that would have spared her life and protected her family from this nightmare?